present his State of the Union in writing. And that continued to be the tradition up until 1913, when Woodrow Wilson decided he had a whole lot of things he wanted to say to the Congress, and he wanted to say them in person. So at that point, he returned to what we see today is our tradition of the President of the United States actually coming into the well of the House to the Congress and addressing the Congress directly. You will notice, however, that there is because of checks and balances and because of the separation of powers, the President of the United States cannot go into the Capitol building unless he is invited and escorted by a member of Congress. And this is why you will see the President coming in, you know, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. And he's always walked down the aisle by significant members, usually of his own party, as he is being escorted in. That's his only real legal entree into the Capitol. The Constitution tells us that at least once a year the President should report. He may report at other times depending upon he feels that Congress may require it or request it. The President is allowed to recommend legislation, but someone in the Congress must introduce it. The President cannot. One of the constitutional discussions that was going on this summer was that the health care bill was in large measure written in the White House under the direction of Rahm Emanuel. And there were many who said that is a betrayal of the constitutional requirement that all legislation must originate in the Congress. The President can convene emergency sessions of Congress. It is the responsibility of the President to receive foreign ambassadors. It is the responsibility of the President to faithfully execute all the laws of the United States. And it is the responsibility of the President to commission all federal officers who take substantially the same oath as the President to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States. Section 4 talks about impeachment. The impeachment of the President, the Vice President, and other civil officers. The Constitution specifically says they may be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The procedure is rather simple. The House votes to impeach and requires only a simple majority. Then the trial is held in the Senate, requiring a 2/3 vote for removal. Remember, we said impeachment is like an indictment. Still must be found guilty. The Chief Justice then presides over those proceedings. There have been 2 impeachments in American history. One was Andrew Johnson in 1868. The Senate at that time fell just 1 vote short of removing him from office. Then, of course, Mr. William Jefferson Clinton was impeached by the House, tried in the Senate, and acquitted by a vote on February the 12th, 1999. In 1974, many of you remember, Richard Nixon resigned as the House was preparing their articles of impeachment. There have been 11 other times that impeachment has been used against federal officers, and it was designed, again, a check and a balance, that the legislature has a check upon executive power. And the idea of impeachment is also to provide a stability, to provide an orderly means by which an official can be removed without bloodshed. So with that in our background, that's a little bit, or that's the major points about the executive. We've got time to scoot along here to what the second article that we want to talk about tonight, and that was Article 3, the judicial branch. This was the establishment of courts and judges. Remember we said that under the Articles of Confederation, there was no federal court system. There was no court whereby disagreements between states and so forth, or states and the national government, could be adjudicated. So under the Constitution of the United States, this is very interesting. The Constitution of the United States establishes only one court, and that is the Supreme Court. All the lower courts have been established by constitutional mandate through legislation, through statutory law. Now, they have the right to do that. The Constitution says that the Congress can establish whatever federal courts it needs. So if the Congress decides it doesn't like the circuit courts, it can get rid of them. It could add more courts. It could add an infinite number of layers if it wanted to. It could do that as far as the Constitution is concerned. The Congress could abolish, they can add. The Constitution says that judges should hold offices, quote, during good behavior. Now, that is code for, that's constitutional talk for life, essentially what it is. The reason for that is that the framers really did hope that judges could be insulated from political pressure. They hoped that they could study and know the law and not have to be responsible for standing for election and so forth. Gouverneur Morris, who we said was the writer of most of the Constitution, made this comment: those who are charged with the important duties of administering justice should, if possible, depend only on God. And I believe that statement is critical in many different ways. Number one, that our founders realized there is a God. He is not silent. That there is a defined divine law. That there is an absolute standard of truth to which men should repair. Their compensation, judges cannot have their pay cut during the time of their tenure. The idea was the King of England had done this. They had made decisions he didn't like. He would cut their pay, making it almost impossible for them to continue. This was our constitutional effort to keep the Congress and all from interfering with the duties and what they hoped would be righteous judgments of the court. In the Constitution, one of the most important decisions that the that the Supreme Court has ever made was handed down in 1803, and it's called Marbury versus Madison. And in this decision, Chief Justice John Marshall and the court interpreted the Constitution in such a way that it gave the power of the court what is called judicial review, where the court can review the constitutionality of a law and actually strike the law down if they deem it to be unconstitutional. This happened with the line item veto in the 1990s. Several presidents had campaigned and begged for the line item veto. And I believe it's called New York versus Clinton. The Supreme Court ruled no, the Constitution says a president has to either sign or reject an entire bill. They may not pick and choose. So that would be an example of judicial review, of the court's ability to look at a law and actually strike it down. Probably one that we're familiar with is Roe v. Wade, where there was the Texas law that strongly controlled access to abortion. That was struck down by the Supreme Court. Jefferson, who was president at the time, strongly disagreed with Marbury v. Madison, but it has remained a precedent and has become almost to the point of almost the same power as constitutional law. The Supreme Court is to sit in judgment on cases that involve foreign officials, admiralty or maritime laws, because these are difficult for the states to handle, controversies between states, controversy between citizens in different states, and at one time, under the Constitution, an individual citizen could sue the state. However, in the 11th Amendment, we'll see that in 1795, that was struck down, that was amended, so now a state cannot be sued without its permission. The Supreme Court has two types of jurisdiction. Number one, original jurisdiction. Now, I should go back to that, because we all kind of laughed about a state allowing itself to be sued. And we're right, that's not going to happen very often. But one of the things that you might start to see happening right now is in the number of states that are attempting to sue the federal government to stop the health care bill. One of the arguments that the federal judge has made is this, that the states do not have the constitutional right to do that, but that an individual within the state would have to sue their state to be exempted from that. The state would allow itself to be sued, so then it could go to the Supreme Court and a decision be made. So we may see that coming up over the next few months and couple of years as the Obamacare lawsuits are making their way through the court system. So sometimes it is kind of laughable, but other times it has a real purpose behind it. And states will allow them to be sued if they think there's a constitutional principle involved. Courts have two kinds of jurisdiction. Number one, it's called original jurisdiction. These are the areas that the Supreme Court must oversee. Usually for anything having to do with foreign officials or anything that has to do with the states. The other form of jurisdiction they had is what is called appellate, and that is the appeals process. These are the cases, this was designed to be a check on the judicial power. And one thing that's interesting is this. The Congress, under the Constitution, can pass legislation that says this legislation can never be reviewed by the Supreme Court. That congressional authority is there. Now, it's been over 100 years since that's ever been done, but if the Congress of the United States wishes to do that, it can limit the appellate jurisdiction of the court in a particular instance. One of the things that the Constitution says is that a trial must be held in the state where a crime is committed. The jury of common citizens was considered an important check on the abuse of power by judges and prosecutors. This was a reflection of their horror at the practice that often took place of taking American citizens to England for trial. So this was an effort to try to address what they had felt was a tyrannical practice under British rule. However, when we get down to extradition and so forth, I'll wait on that. And then the last is treason. And I think it's important for us to talk about this. The Constitution of the United States says the definition of treason will consist only, and that word is critical, only in levying war against, now here's the word, them. Remember what we said at the time of the Constitution, The states did not really see themselves as one big